Do Longhorn fans really want Steve Sarkisian to give up play calling? I'll tell you why Sark shouldn't even consider that on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns. Intro!
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. You are locked on to the Texas Longhorns. I'm your host, BK Brad Kellner, Texas grad, Austin native, and longtime sports radio host in the Lone Star State. Thank you for making Locked On Longhorns your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell your Longhorn friends about Locked On, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert. On today's show, what does Texas need to do in the SEC tournament to punch its ticket to the big dance? And a few thoughts on Longhorn baseball's midweek win over UT-Arlington last night, and a quick preview of the first SEC series in Texas baseball history. That's all coming up, but first, some Texas football. Should Steve Sarkisian give up offensive play calling? I know a lot of Texas fans have been asking for that since the conclusion of the college football playoff semifinal against Ohio State. On Monday, Coach Sark was asked about whether or not being the CEO of the Texas football program and also calling plays was too much for him. Here's what Sark had to say.
It doesn't put more on me that way because I've got a lot of trust in the people that we hire. And obviously offensively, I believe in what we do, and again, we've got a core on offensive staff that have been together with Flood and Milwee and Banks and those guys. We've had some turnover over the years at the receiver position, but, we've got Coach Jackson's going into year 3 with us now, and Chad Scott's new. We've got some analysts that have stayed on board and didn't want to lose. I didn't want to lose Mike Bamonte, who had some real opportunities. But again, we're forever growing and evolving. And so you're able to bring in a Neil Brown as an analyst to provide a spark and some new ideas and to forge some things where we can grow as an offensive football staff. But in the end, I feel very confident and comfortable doing those things. And if that day ever comes when I don't, my ego's not too big to where I wouldn't be able to pass that off. But as of today, I feel very comfortable doing those things.
I love hearing that ender from Sark. If I ever don't feel comfortable doing all of those things, my ego isn't too big. I'll have no problem passing that off. A lot of coaches do have problems delegating responsibilities to other people. I love that Steve Sarkisian down the road will at least look at changes if they are deemed necessary. But right now, it's not necessary. And by the way, sorry to bring up the Ohio State game. Unfortunately, I can't get it out of my head. And I know I'm not alone. It's been more than 2 months, but that first and goal sequence from the 1-yard line is all I can think about. And look, that was bad. Sark can talk about a lack of execution all he wants. That was just bad play calling, plain and simple. There's no way to execute that second and goal pitch to Quintravion Wisner against that Ohio State defense in that spot. It was stupid. And, hey, it's 2 years in a row that Texas's season has ended with red zone failure. And I get it. It's 2 years in a row that the red zone offense has been a little bit of a problem at Texas. We didn't just see that in the college football playoff semifinal against Ohio State. We saw that way too often in 2024, especially in the biggest games that the Longhorns played in 2024. So the red zone offense has to get better. And there are things with the rest of the Longhorn offense that can get better. But I trust in Steve Sarkisian, and I trust that it will get better because Sark is one of the best offensive minds in the sport, and he has been for years. I mean, Texas hired this guy because he was an elite play caller at Alabama. Really, he was elite in both aspects of being an offensive coordinator, in terms of game planning and in terms of play calling. That's why he got the gig in the first place. He didn't do enough at Washington or USC as a head coach to get the gig at Texas. You hired Steve Sarkisian because of his play calling. We all saw what he did at Alabama in 2020, turning Mac Jones into a first-round pick, turning Devontae Smith into a Heisman winner, and obviously being a part of that coaching staff that won the national championship for the Crimson Tide. They put up 50-plus points against Ohio State in the national championship that year. That's the reason why Steve Sarkisian was offered the Texas job in the first place. His offensive coordinating and play calling is his strongest ability. And you want him to give that up? To me, that is crazy. That is crazy. And anybody talking about major changes needing to be made with this Texas football team is also insane. This is a team that is 25-5 in the last 2 years. They won a conference championship in 2023. They played for a conference championship in the toughest conference in the sport in 2024 when nobody said they were going to be good enough to compete in this league. The offense, called by Steve Sarkisian, is a huge reason why the Longhorns have had that type of success and also why they've made it to back-to-back college football playoff semifinals. And look, I brought up the Washington game a moment ago. I know everybody talks about that game in early 2024, and it's 2 years in a row where Sark called bad plays in the red zone to end the Horn season. The fourth down play call, go back and watch it. It was perfect. Quinn Ewers just threw the ball too high to A.D. Mitchell. If he throws a bullet and hits him in the numbers in the front right corner of the end zone, Texas is playing for a national championship last season. And maybe the narrative surrounding Steve Sarkisian and this Texas offense is completely different. So I trust in Sark. You don't need major changes right now. Could you use some tweaks? Of course. And I love that Steve Sarkisian talked about the cohesiveness that he has with the members of his coaching staff, right? Use your assistants. That's why you have a coaching staff in the first place. Use Kyle Flood, who's been an offensive coordinator and a head coach before. Use A.J. Milwee. Use Chad Scott. Use Chris Jackson. And use Neil Brown, too. Like, all of those guys can help come up with your game plan during the week, and all of those guys can provide input during games on Saturday to help Steve Sarkisian out. You can switch some things up to perfect the details, but a huge overhaul is not necessary. Honestly, the play calling side of things isn't what Steve Sarkisian should be passing on, because that's his best asset. Again, I don't want to take that away from him. I don't want to take that away from this Texas team. If you feel like Sark has too much on his plate, if Steve Sarkisian feels like he has too much on his plate, maybe it's the CEO stuff that he can be doing less of. And I think you've seen Steve Sarkisian delegate a little bit more of those other responsibilities that go into being the head coach of a blue blood college football program. Obviously, bringing in Brandon Harris to be the GM, giving him a big contract extension this offseason to keep him around. That was huge. Bringing in Aaron Joe and Josh Dunson from Georgia Tech and Memphis, respectively, to help out with the recruiting staff. That's great. That's the beauty of coaching at the University of Texas. You basically have unlimited resources. And look at what Nick Saban did at Alabama during his dynastic run in Tuscaloosa. He had the biggest coaching staff in the country every single year. Why? Because he could. Like, at the end of his career, there weren't rules against how many assistant and support staff members he could have on his staff. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to get as much brain power within my program as I can. I'm going to get as many eyes on my team as I can. So I'm getting all of this intel and information from qualified college football coaches who have been there, done that at other places. I'm going to get them to help me out with my team. Steve Sarkisian is doing that with the hiring of Neil Brown, but also he's getting extra help with recruiting as well to make sure that he can focus on what he needs to do to get this offense right. Steve Sarkisian knows the offense can be better, but again, he also realizes that that is his strong suit. That is why he got this gig in the first place. And I think any Texas fan who is calling for Steve Sarkisian to give up offensive play calling is borderline insane. Again, I trust in Sark. That's his best strength. Play calling is not one of those things that needs to be changed around here. He should be using his best asset. I feel good about what this offense is going to do with Arch Manning taking over under center. But I want to hear from y'all. Comment below with your thoughts. Do you think Steve Sarkisian should give up offensive play calling in 2025? All right. Coming up next, let's talk a little Texas basketball, shall we? The Longhorns open up SEC tournament play later today against Vanderbilt. What do the Horns need to do in Nashville to punch their ticket to the NCAA tournament? Do they still have a chance to make it to the NCAA tournament? I'll tell you the path for the Longhorns coming up next right here on Locked on Longhorns. But first, I want to give some love to one of our sponsors. That is Intuit TurboTax. Texas was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. I know you've got just over a month, but don't put this off. You don't want to wait until April 14th to take care of your taxes. You'll get an expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, and you're going to get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day and watching more Locked On Longhorns and Locked On Everything. You're going to have an expert that will find you every deduction possible to file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Get your real-time updates on the iOS mobile app. Again, TurboTax.com for more information. All right, back here on Locked On Longhorns, your team every day. Let's talk a little Texas men's basketball. The Longhorns will play Vanderbilt in the 12-13 matchup in the opening round of the SEC tournament. Tip off around 2:30 this afternoon. The Longhorns, the designated road team, they are the 13 seed, but they will feel like a true road team, obviously playing Vanderbilt in Nashville. Texas is a 2.5-point underdog, according to our friends at FanDuel right now. And I think it goes without saying, but this is a must-win game for the Texas Longhorns. They need this one today, and they also need to beat Texas A&M tomorrow to even be talked about as an NCAA tournament team. Here was Rodney Terry after the loss to Oklahoma on Saturday, talking about what the Horns need to do in the SEC tournament to punch their ticket to the big dance.
I preached to our guys over the last 2 weeks, everything's about the next possession. It's about living in the moment where you are. There is no game 2 in a tournament if you don't win game 1. So you got to put all your efforts. It's a 1-game season right now in terms of competing this time of year right now. So that's where our focus is going to be, in terms of controlling what you can control, living where your feet are. And again, every moment, every possession is what we've got to try to be prepared for.
When's the last time Rodney Terry has had a voice? I feel like it's been months, if not years. But he gave you all the coaching cliches, but he's right. I mean, Texas can't worry about Texas A&M today. They've got to worry about beating Vanderbilt today, because if they don't do that, then the season's over. We'll see about an NIT invitation. I would assume the Longhorns would get invited to the NIT, but would they accept that invitation, or would the season be over? And obviously, you got to wonder about the future of Rodney Terry if Texas can't take down Vandy today. Quick look at the bracket matrix, which is a compilation of all of the bracketologies from credible sources around the internet. I saw 97 updated brackets. Only 2 of those 97 have Texas in the field of 68. It's 2.5%. Joe Lenardi of ESPN has Texas as one of his first 4 teams out. Jerry Palm of CBS doesn't even have Texas as one of his first 4 teams out. So again, it's not just today. The Longhorns need 2, maybe even 3 wins, right? I don't even know if beating Vandy and A&M is going to be enough to get the Horns in. They might need a victory on Friday against the fake UT to clinch a spot in the NCAA tournament. But again, no chance for Texas if they don't win today and tomorrow. Of course, the Longhorns met Vanderbilt in the regular season on the road in Nashville. Texas lost that game 86-78. The Longhorns were in it. They were up by as many as 10 in the second half, but they completely collapsed down the stretch. The Commodores closed the game out on a 42-24 run. They scored 42 points in the last 13 minutes of that game. Here's the good news for Texas. Vandy was 14-3 at Memorial Gymnasium. They were 3-7 on the road and 3-1 in neutral games. So below 500 anywhere away from their arena. Now, again, they are in Nashville. They're in their home city. They're just a few miles away from campus. They do get to sleep in their own beds, but they haven't been the same team outside of their home gym. And I will say this, human nature could benefit the Longhorns this afternoon. Vandy's already in the NCAA tournament. I mean, the bracket matrix right now has Vandy as a 10 seed. They're going to be fine. Even if they lose this game today, they're still going to hear their name called on Selection Sunday. Texas needs this one way more than Vanderbilt does. Desperation is a hell of a drug. I say that all the time. And you look at what Texas basketball has done recently, you look at the teams they've lost to. Arkansas, they were on the bubble when Texas lost. Oklahoma, they were on the bubble when Texas lost to them. I'm forgetting somebody else. Georgia was on the bubble when Texas lost to them. All of those teams were desperate. The one good win that the Longhorn men have over these last 2 or 3 weeks, Mississippi State. That was a team that was already a tournament lock. Texas needed that game more than Mississippi State did. The Longhorns went on the road to Stark Vegas and knocked off the Bulldogs. So maybe you get a repeat of that. Look, I think Vandy's going to try. I don't think they're going to bench their players. I'm not saying this will be easy for Texas, but the Longhorns are the more desperate team. Can they use that desperation against a team that doesn't need this game as much to get a win? Didn't help them on Saturday, but again, they were playing another desperate team. We'll see. The Longhorns have had trouble stringing 2 wins together this year. I mean, what do the Longhorns need today? Before we talk about Texas A&M, because hopefully we're talking about that during tomorrow's episode, what does Texas need today to beat Vandy? Well, first and foremost, they need Trey Johnson to bounce back. The SEC Freshman of the Year, led the conference in scoring with 20.2 points per game. He was amazing all year long. He was horrible against the Sooners on Saturday. 0 of 14. Got to make at least one shot. But Texas needs a 20-plus point performance from Trey Johnson, who was really good in the final month of the regular season until the finale against OU. He was great down the stretch. He just was a non-factor against Oklahoma. That can't happen. It goes without saying. But it's not just Trey Johnson. That's been too much of the problem and too many of the other losses for this Texas men's basketball team. It's just been Trey Johnson and nobody else. You can't have a one-man show against a team as good as Vanderbilt. You need Jordan Pope and Tremont Mark and Arthur Kaluma to kind of do what they did against OU. I mean, Pope had 21 points in that game. He only averages 11 on the season. Tremont Mark had 12 points in that game. He only averages 10 on the season. Arthur Kaluma chipped in 12 as well. If you can get Trey Johnson to go back to being the Trey Johnson that we saw for most of SEC play, and you get those other guys to look like the guys they were before they got to Texas, doesn't feel like that big of an ask. This season, though, unfortunately, it has been that big of an ask. That's why Texas is on the outside looking in of the tournament field right now. But if those things happen, hell, if just 3 of those 4 guys show up, you don't even need all 4 of them. If just 3 of those guys bring their A games today, then I think Texas has a very good chance to win. Also, man, if I'm Vanderbilt, I'm going to be pressuring Texas all game long because the Texas point guards have really struggled handling any sort of presses or traps. A lot of teams have been doing that as of late. Texas has to do a better job of getting the ball across half court when the other team is doing a full court press. So a lot of pressure on Texas basketball today. Of course, Rodney Terry's coaching for his job, potentially. Texas is playing for its tournament lives. A lot on the line. We'll see if the Longhorns can find a way to get it done. Ken Pom, by the way, has this as a 1-point Texas loss. We'll see what happens. Once again, 2:30, sometime around 2:30 will be the tip time between the 13-seed Texas and the 12-seed Vanderbilt. The Horns get a win. They will play Texas A&M tomorrow. If they win that, a reunion against Rick Barnes in what would be the quarterfinal round of the SEC tournament. The path is there. Even though the Longhorns closed out the season with a thud, really a bunch of thuds, there is still a path for them to get an at-large bid in the NCAA tournament. Hell, there's a path for them to get an automatic bid. All they have to do is win 5 games in 5 days in the best league in America. That's pretty easy, right? Right? Not so much. We'll see what happens today. Also, we'll see if Kendall Weaver can do a little bit more. He finally came back after missing 15 games with that hip flexor injury. Only played 5 minutes on Saturday night. Didn't really look like he was in the right place. Do the coaches trust him to even play in this game? And can he provide some sort of impact? He was really good for Texas in March of 2024. Can he give you something, or is he just kind of lost because of how much time he missed? We'll find that out today. But hopefully the Longhorns can make some magic happen here in Nashville in their first ever SEC tournament. They're going to need it. They are going to need it to have a shot in March. All right. That's enough Texas basketball talk. Let's shift gears here. Let's talk about a winning team. Coming up next, Texas baseball picked up its 14th straight win as they knocked off UT-Arlington at the Dish last night. It wasn't easy, But the Horns got it done, and Jim Schlossnagel's crew now turns its attention to the SEC. We'll talk some Longhorn baseball coming up next right here on Locked On Longhorns. But first, if you are looking to optimize your nutrition this year, our friends at Factor make eating well very easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh and never frozen, and they're ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. Cooking sucks. It takes way too much time. Then you got to clean everything up after you're done, and the food's usually not that good. At least if you're like me, the food's usually not that good. Our friends at Factor have you covered. They've got 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every week. They're changing up their menu all the time. You can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle. Whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto, they've got you covered. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfast, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. Again, cooking is a pain in the you-know-what. Factor takes all of the stress out of meal planning, out of meal prepping. You don't have to spend a bunch of time at the crowded grocery store and spend a bunch of money there either. And the price of groceries is insane these days. The convenience is unbeatable. No prep, no mess. Great food in minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/lockedoncollege 50 off and use that code LockedOnCollege 50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. Again, the code LockedOnCollege 50 off at factormeals.com/lockedoncollege 50 off. And you're going to get free shipping and 50% off your first box from our great friends at Factor. Welcome back to Locked On Longhorns, your team every day. Our final segment of today's show. By the way, appreciate y'all tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, please like the video. Please subscribe to this podcast, whether it's YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcast or however you're listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. That's the best way to help us grow here on Locked On Longhorns. Little Texas baseball. The Longhorns made it 14 straight victories last night as they knocked off UT-Arlington at the Dish by a final score of 7-4. This one wasn't easy. It's a 3-3 game going into the bottom of the 8th inning, but the Longhorns went to work. The bottom of the lineup set the table, and the big dogs at the top were hungry. Will Gasparino started off the 8th inning with a leadoff single. Pinch hitter Rylan Galvan drew a walk, and that brought the leadoff man Ethan Mendoza to the plate. Mendoza was riding a 9-game winning streak going into last night. He was 0 for 2, did have 2 walks, but that hitting streak was in jeopardy of coming to an end. Well, it didn't come to an end because he came through a 2-run triple down the right field line to give Texas a 5-3 lead. Jalen Flores followed that up with the sacrifice fly to make it 6-3. The freshman, A-Rod, Adrian Rodriguez, continues to impress right in the heart of the Texas batting order. He adds an RBI single. That made it 7-3. The Longhorns gave one back in the top of the 9th inning, but they put up enough insurance with that 4-run 8th inning. That was the difference. Texas gets the win, and they avoid that brutal midweek loss. We saw Ole Miss slip up in a midweek game yesterday. We've seen A&M slip up in a couple of midweek games this season. They're not always easy. Last night wasn't easy. The important thing is you find a way to get a victory, and that's exactly what Schloss's group did. Another great pitching performance for Texas. Jason Flores did not start. I was a little surprised by that. He started the Horns' first 2 midweek games, but Jim Schlossnagle said he plans on using Flores out of the bullpen when we get to SEC play starting this weekend. So he wanted to see what Flores looked like out of the bullpen last night. So instead, it was Jason Rarick who got the start. 3 2/3 innings, gave up just 1 run on 2 hits, no walks, a solid showing for him. Then came Jason Flores, another solid outing for him as well. 2 1/3 scoreless innings, gave up just 1 hit, no walks, did hit a guy. Still something for Flores to clean up a little bit, the freshman, but you feel like that will get better with time. He's been really good. 3 appearances, all midweek games. He hasn't played a team as good as Mississippi State or really a team as good as anybody Texas will see in conference play this year, maybe outside of Missouri. But Flores has been great. 3 appearances so far. He has an ERA of 1.00. So love what I've seen from him thus far. And yeah, the Texas pitching staff, again, just continues to dazzle. Max Weiner in his first year as the pitching coach. Everybody was excited about the Jim Schlossnagle hire, but a huge reason why Schloss was so good at A&M was because of his pitching coach, Max Weiner. Obviously, Texas gets Weiner to follow Schloss to Austin. And Weiner, he's been big, very big for this Texas staff. The Longhorns are currently 6th in the country in ERA as a team. They are also top 10 in hits allowed per 9 innings as well, pitching a huge reason why Texas is riding this 14-game winning streak going into SEC play. And yeah, the competition gets a whole hell of a lot tougher. Now, Texas did beat an SEC team in this 14-game win streak. They actually run-ruled Ole Miss. Speaking of Ole Miss, a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, the first ever SEC series is coming up for Texas baseball, and it's a good one. Texas at the Dude to take on Mississippi State Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The first 3 meetings for the Longhorns in Mississippi State since the 2021 College World Series. They played some epic games up there. Unfortunately, the Longhorns dropped 2 of those 3, and Hail State went on to win the College World Series in Omaha that season. I don't know if you can call it revenge because you've got a new coach and new players for Texas and new players on both sides, really. But it's the first time that these 2 teams will play since those epic games in Omaha a few years ago. Mississippi State, they're 12-4 on the year. They beat Old Dominion last night. They've got another midweek game tonight against Nichols. And interesting, Texas was picked to finish 8th in the SEC preseason poll. Mississippi State picked to finish 9th. The Bulldogs not ranked right now, but they're a very good team. And we'll be saying that a lot when talking about Texas baseball opponents in conference play because the Southeastern Conference is by far the best league in college baseball. You think SEC men's basketball is tough? Buckle up. Put those cleats on. Double knot them. Tie them tight. It's going to be a gauntlet for Texas. But I feel great about the Longhorns' chances. They have been very, very impressive over this 14-game win streak. They've beaten some decent teams as well. The pitching's got things figured out. No errors by the defense last night, which is good. And Texas has been getting contributions from 1 through 9 throughout their lineup. So it'll be a big test. It'll be a raucous crowd. It'll be a hell of a lot of fun. And how about LSU coming to town next weekend? The number 1 team in the country, according to a couple of the polls. It'll be a great way to open up the home SEC slate, for Texas. But of course, it starts on the road this weekend in Starkville. Love it. Very excited about the Longhorns. They've been one of the most impressive stories in college baseball, and I think that will continue as we dip into league play. And that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Longhorns. Hopefully tomorrow we're talking about a Texas victory in the opening round of the SEC tournament, and we are previewing a rematch against Texas A&M. Of course, the Longhorns and Aggies split the regular season series with both teams winning on their home floor. Hopefully we're previewing that game. If not, we might be talking about some coaching candidates for Texas men's basketball because that might be the end of Rodney Terry. We'll talk more Texas football. We'll talk some Texas baseball. We'll have plenty more to get into and some great guests. I know it's been all me over these first 3 days. We're going to have some great conversations with some great guests who cover the Longhorns and some of your favorite lifetime Longhorns as well. So if you're not subscribed, make sure you do so. We've got some big things planned for the future of Locked On Longhorns. And hey, we appreciate y'all tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Longhorns your first listen today. For your second listen, check out our friends at the Locked On College Basketball Podcast with Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. Those guys do a great job. Of course, March is here. Conference tournament week is going on. Selection Sunday is on Sunday. Make sure you're the most informed college basketball fan in the group chat, at the office, wherever you are. You can do that with Locked On College Basketball. Just find them on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank you all so much once again for tuning in. I am BK Brad Kellner. Horns up, mic's off. We'll see you next time on Locked On Longhorns.